So welcome everyone on this channel named Geeks for Geeks School, and today we guys are here to design this beautiful technical documentation page in the web lab on code.org using the basic features of HTML and CSS. So this is the entire page. This is how the page looks like, and the main advantage of using this page is everything over here, the hyperlinks which you are able to see in this table like structure in the left side. All these hyperlinks are connected to these headers over here. For example, if I will hit this CSS border, then what is going to happen? It will redirect me on this CSS border hyperlink, and I will be able to see all the things that I have defined for this CSS border. Similarly, if I want to check out the material defined by the developer for this CSS responsive, then I just have to hit this CSS responsive hyperlink and I am going to get redirected on this CSS responsive header. So this is how this technical documentation page works. Now how can we design this beautiful web page on code.org in the web lab? That's what we are going to check out. So let's dive into the platform and begin creating this beautiful web page. So for accessing the web lab, we have to first hit this create button. Automatically this is a cascading menu which is going to open up, and then we can visit this view all projects option. So it is going to redirect us on this beautiful web page. We need to come down and hit this view full list option, and then we will be able to see that web lab option getting reflected somewhere in the bottom. Just a second, let me do it one more time. I think by mistake I have clicked on that game lab option. Okay, so when you will come down here, you will be able to see this web lab option getting reflected. Hit this web lab to access the web lab environment where you can define the HTML and CSS codes. So this is how the environment looks like, and this is the workspace where you can define all the HTML codes, and this is the workspace where you can define all the CSS code. Okay, so first of all we are going to define the required HTML code, and after that we will begin. We'll start with customizing the appearance of all the components which are going to get reflected over here using the basic CSS coding. So the first thing that I am going to do is, let's define a main section with an ID, let's say with an ID named main-doc. Okay, and I'm closing it over here. Now inside this main section, I am going to define the HTML code for all the components which are visible to us over here on this beautiful technical documentation web page. So the first thing that I would like to define is this navigation bar tag, and let's make use of this ID navbar for this navigation, and I am closing it over here. Great. Now inside this I would like to define a header. Okay, now for that we can make use of header tags. Done with that, and inside these header tags, the first thing that is getting reflected right on the top over here is Css Introduction. So how can we get this reflected? Now before this we would like to see this thing also, GeeksforGeeks present getting reflected right on the top. So what we can do, we can copy this whole text from here and we can place it just before this main tag, in between two header tags like this. Okay, so as you can see now, the Geeks for Geeks is getting reflected on the stage area over here. If you want to get it reflected right in the center, if you want to shift it in the center of this web page, you can make use of inline styling. So first of all, you need to write down the name of the attribute, and after that you can make use of this property text align, because we want to align the text in the center. So that is the reason we need to pass this value for this text align property. Now if you will expand the stage area, you will be able to see this Geeks for Geeks reflecting right in the center of the stage area. Okay, let's now come back inside this header tag. So the first thing that we have over here is this CSS introduction. So the first thing we have over here on the left side is CSS documentation. So first of all, I'm going to define the required HTML code for this one, and after that we are going to begin defining the required code for these elements over here. So let's put this CSS documentation inside the header tags, because you know the font size of this one is pretty big. That's how we can get the required output. Great. Now there is a table which we are able to see over here on the left side of this web page, and you know it's a kind of list. How can we define a list in a web page? Which tag can we make use of for defining a list? So because we don't have any numbers getting reflected against these list items, so that is the reason we can go with UL tag, right? UL is for unordered list. There are three kinds of list in HTML. One is unordered list, the second one is ordered list, and the third one is description list. So because there are no numbers which are present against these list items, so that is the reason we can make use of unordered list. And we can end it over here like this. Now inside this we can define all the list items. So the tag that you can make use of for defining the list items is li. So as you can see over here, these are some hyperlinks which are getting reflected on the left side in this table like structure. So for defining a hyperlink, the tag that we are required to make use of is anchor tag, right? A. Then let's make use of this href attribute to connect it. Okay, to a specific border over here. So I would like to connect it with this CSS introduction. So let's do one thing. Let's first define the required HTML code for getting all these components on the stage area, and after that we will define the code for connecting these hyperlinks with these headers over here. Okay, so I'm done with defining the hyperlink anchor tag, sorry, and inside this the first element that is visible to us over here is CSS introduction. So I am going to copy it from here and let's place it in between the anchor tag like this. Okay, and besides this, you know, I would like to define a class also for this anchor tag, so that with the help of which I can, you know, customize the appearance of this anchor tag afterwards using some you know, basic cascading style sheet coding. So let's have a class with name, let's say navlink. I think this is perfectly fine. Okay, and then we can close the list item tag like this over here. The way we define the required HTML code for this first hyperlink, in the same way we are going to define the required HTML code for all these hyperlinks over here which are getting visible in this table like structure in the left side of the web page. So I'm copying this whole code and placing it over here. Now the only thing that I need to change is first this text. So I need to change it with CSS background. Let's replace this introduction with background. Okay, now we can again copy this whole thing and place it over here. The second thing is the third hyperlink is CSS border. So let's replace this CSS background with CSS border. Done with that. Let's copy this whole code and place it over here. The fourth one is for CSS link, right? So we just have to replace this border with link. Let's copy this whole thing and place it over here. Now the fifth one is, the fifth one is CSS Navigation. We need to replace this link with navigation. And the required components we will be able to see over here on the stage area simultaneously. CSS Responsive is the last one. We need to define the HTML code for CSS Responsive. Okay, so all the required 6 hyperlinks are now getting reflected over here on the stage area. Let's now go back on this main web page we are designing and check out what else, the code of what else we need to define. But before that, we need to check whether we have closed this unordered list or not. Yes, so this unordered list is starting at this point and it is ending at this point, and then the navigation bar is ending at this point. Now what we can do, we can define a separate section with some ID, let's say main body, for the content which is getting reflected over here over this gray color background. Okay, and then let's go back on this HTML document, and here we need to define the end tag also for this section. Yeah, that is perfectly fine now. Okay, now inside this section we are going to have one more section, and let's have a class also for this section. Let it be main section. Okay, and let's also define an ID for this section. Definitely we will be requiring this ID also. So CSS underscore introduction. This is the ID which I am making use of for this section. Okay, and let's define the end tag also for this section. So now for this part we have a nested section, a section inside a section. This is called a nested section. Okay, now the first thing that we have inside this gray colored section is this header, CSS Introduction. So I am going to copy this and put it over here. In between the H1 tags of these header tags. Okay, so as you can see now, the CSS Introduction is getting reflected over here on the stage area. Let's now go back on this original document. So now we have an article which is getting reflected over here on this topic CSS Introduction. Now how can we get this kind of output, or what is the tag we need to make use of for defining this text over here? So what we can do, we can make use of article tag, because it's a kind of article which we are able to see over here, right? And inside this article tag we can make use of the paragraph tags, right? and let's copy this whole thing and place it in between the paragraph tags like this. Okay, so as you can see, the complete article is now getting reflected over here on this beautiful stage area. If I will enlarge the size of the stage area, this is how currently our web page is looking like. Okay, let's shrink the size of this window and go back on this original web form. Now as you can see over here, some there is a unordered list. There are some list items which are getting reflected over here. At present they are getting reflected over here as if they are the part of this article. Yes, they are the part of this article, but we need to get them reflected in the way they are getting reflected over on this beautiful web page. So how can we do this? We guys can make use of unordered list, right, for getting this kind of view for these list items. Let's do that quickly. So we need to go back on this code.org platform, and this is where this first paragraph is ending, topic about CSS. So right at this point where this paragraph is ending, we can define the end paragraph tag over here, and let's now make use of UL tag for defining an unordered list. So the first list item that we have is this CSS background. Why we are not doing it like this? We can just enclose all the list items in between these li tags like this, right? So everything is now going to come under this UL tag, whatever we have over here. Same thing I am going to do with this CSS Navigation, and then we can do this, we can repeat the same steps for the CSS Responsive also. Okay, now let's refresh this stage area and see what is the output we are going to get. So as you can see, now these text over here are getting reflected in the form of a list. So it's an unordered list. Why I'm saying that it is an unordered list? Just because we are able to see some bullets against these items. Fine, so this is what an unordered list looks like. Fine, now comes this text. So we can again make use of the paragraph tags for defining this remaining text, and this is how it is going to look like now. Fine, so this is how right now our web page is looking like. Okay, let's now close this section. So this first section is ending at this point. Now what we can do, we can copy this whole section, okay, and we can paste it over here like this. Great. So the class name for this second section is going to remain the same. It is going to be main section only. Then the ID is also going to remain the same. No, the ID have to be changed, right? For this one, it should be background, CSS background. So let's do one thing. Let's change this introduction to background. Why I am changing the IDs? So that I can connect these hyperlinks with these headers over here with the help of these IDs that I'm defining for each section. So this time for the second section, I am going to have this ID background. Okay, and then inside this header part, we are going to have CSS background. So we need to replace the CSS introduction with CSS background like this. Okay, and then whatever we have inside this section, whatever we have for this article named CSS background, we can copy it from here. Okay, and the only thing that we have to do now is we just have to paste it over here inside these two paragraph tags. Just a second, I think the text was not copied properly. Now I think it is perfectly fine. Yeah, so now this second section is now getting reflected over here on the stage area, right? So we are done with defining the required code for this second section also. Let's now go back on this main web page and check out what do we have in this third section. So we have the CSS border. So the first thing that we have to do is we need to copy this entire section till this point, and then we can put it over here like this. Okay, and after this we need to copy this CSS border and let's paste it over here in place of this CSS background. We need to change the ID also to CSS border. Then whatever we have inside this article for CSS border, we can copy this whole thing and paste it over here in between the paragraph tags. Great. So now this is what you're going to get as an output. So the fourth section is now visible to us, getting reflected on this beautiful stage area. Let's now repeat the same thing for the other three sections. So the third one is CSS link. I am copying this whole section and placing it over here. So it is CSS link, for which we need to define the code for now. And then we need to change it to CSS link, and then we can copy this entire text and place it over here in between these paragraph tags. Great. Let's now repeat the same step for creating the fifth section. So this one is the fifth section, the name of which is Css Navigation. So here it is CSS link, which is currently visible to us. Now we need to change this link to navigation first, right? So as you can see, I am defining unique classes for every section. Fine. And once we are done with defining the required HTML code for bringing all these sections on the stage area, after that we are going to check out how can we connect all the sections to the hyperlinks we have defined on the top. Done with defining the required HTML code for this fifth section. Now the only section which I am left with is this CSS responsive. Let's now define the code for this CSS responsive section. So for that we can repeat the same steps. So I'm copying this whole section and placing it right below this code I just copied. Now we need to replace the name of the ID from CSS Navigation. We need to change it to CSS Responsive. Okay, and this H1 text also we have to change. Let's now copy this entire article and paste it over here in between these paragraph tags. Okay, so as you can see, now all those six sections are getting reflected over here on this beautiful stage area. Now how to connect these sections with these hyperlinks, the HTML code we defined right on the top over here. I'm talking about these hyperlinks. Okay, so the best way to connect these hyperlinks with the sections, with the 6 sections that we just defined, is by making use of this href attribute. Now what you can do, see the first one, the first option which is getting reflected over here is Css Introduction. If you want to connect this Css Introduction hyperlink to this first section, the name of which is Css Introduction, okay, you can make use of this ID that you have defined for this section over here. Right, now how can we make use of this ID? We just have to copy this whole ID and place it over here, and just before this ID name we need to place this hash symbol. So this is the syntax that you have to keep in mind when you are working with IDs. Okay, make sure that you have placed this hashtag before the ID name. In the same way, if you are accessing something with the help of its ID on this cascading style sheets, you have to place this hashtag first, and after that you need to write down the name of the ID. Okay, then only you will be able to access component for which you have defined this ID over here. Okay, remember this syntax. Fine. Now I'm going to repeat the same steps for all these hyperlinks over here. So the second one is for CSS background. Now what is the ID that we have defined for this second section over here? The name of the ID is CSS background. So let's copy this ID, and first of all I am going to place this hashtag, and then we can write down the name of the ID we just copied. Let's now come down and copy the ID we have defined for this third section and paste it in between these two double inverted commas like this. Let's repeat the same steps for the other sections also. So CSS link is the fourth one, right? So I need to copy this whole thing and put it in between these two double inverted commas over here, and before this we need to place this hashtag too. Coming down over here, let's copy this Css Navigation and put it in between these two double inverted commas. Great. Now the only thing that we are left with is this sixth section, the ID of which is CSS Responsive. So let's copy this thing and put it in between these two double inverted commas like this, and just before this ID we need to place this hashtag also. Let's now refresh this stage area. So this is now this is how right now this web page is looking like. Let's run it on a bigger window and see what kind of output we are going to get. So this is how the web page is looking like at present. If you will hit this CSS responsive, it will redirect you on this CSS responsive header. Similarly, if you will hit this CSS link, you are going to get redirected on this article for which the header is CSS link. So that's how, with the help of ID, you can connect these hyperlinks with different sections which are present on the same page. Let's now go back on the code.org platform and define the required CSS codes for styling these components which we have right now on the stage area. So the first thing that I would like to define the code for is the division section. So that's how we can access all the division sections we have defined over here. Fine. Okay. So border top, I would like to see a gap of 300 pixels. What do we have inside the division? Let's first check it out. Just give me a short moment. I am checking out something over here. So we have this h1 tag, then we have this main class, then we define this navigation tag, the ID of which is navbar, and then we have this unordered list over here, and after that we defined the code. So this navigation bar is ending at this point, right? Okay, and we have everything inside this main section. Got it. Okay, and then we have this section. Okay, then there are 6 different sections we have defined inside this section with ID main body. Fine. So that's what we have done. That's what we have defined till now the HTML code for. So why are we using this division tag? Let's eliminate this whole thing and access this main class, okay, with the help of this ID. Now if you want to access this main tag with the help of this ID, you can copy this ID name from here and place it in this CSS document. And just before this ID you need to place this hashtag also, as I've told you earlier. Okay, so I would like to first set the display of everything. So I would like to have a flexible kind of display. Okay, and as you can see, this CSS document and everything is now shifted on the left side, and this text is getting reflected over here in the main body. Okay, now if you'll remove this display from here, this is what is going to happen. So if you want to see them like this, you can define this flexible display for this main document ID. I would like to see them always covering the entire width of the page. So 100% I have defined for this width property. Let's now define something for the font family so as to make it identical to this whole thing which is getting reflected over here on this beautiful web page. So I would like to have this Arial font family, and sans serif is a font I would like to use. Then font size also I would like to define. So I would like to have a font size of 16 pixels. I think this is going to work. Yeah. So this is how at present the web page is looking like. Right. Okay, let's now customize the appearance of this main body. Okay, so this is the ID which we have defined for this section, inside which all the 6 sections are coming. Right, so for accessing this ID, this section, we can copy this ID name from here, and we can first place a hashtag, and after that we can write down the name of the ID. So the first thing that I would like to have is a flexible kind of display for everything. So this is how the navigation, this is how the web page is looking like at present. Fine. And how about if I will make it block, change it to block. Okay, so right now it is going to give us this kind of output. No problem, we'll check it afterwards. Let it be flex only for now. And then we can define the flex direction. So I would like to see them in this direction, column wise. So now this is how the page is going to look like. Fine. Then width. So I would like to define 75% width for this section over here. So as you can see, some space has got created over here in between this CSS documentation part and this complete section. And it is just because of this width we have defined over here for this main body. Now let's define something for the padding part. I would like to have a space of 20 pixels inside this section with ID main body. Okay, so it has created a big space in between this content over here and this content which is getting reflected inside the main section. Okay, now we are going to define some alignment property. So align self, I would like to define flex starting for this align self. So this is what you are going to get now. Let's now define a background color also for this main section. So what is a property we guys can make use of? We can make use of this property named background color, and this time we are going to make use of this code. So it is for dark gray, and as you can see the background color of this main section is now changed, and that's what we are getting as an output currently. If you want to play with the font family, definitely you can. Let's make use of this line of code and place it over here. Great. And for font size, I am going to make use of this 16 pixels only. Good. So right now the web page is the view of this web page is somewhat like this. Now the second thing that we have is this Navbar Id, okay, which we have defined for this navigation tag. Let's now access this Navbar Id. So again we are going to make use of this hashtag sign and write down the name of this ID over here. First thing that I would like to do is let's define some padding for this navbar, and width is going to be 20 pixels. Let's set a display also for this navigation bar. Display of flexible. Right now this is how the view of this web page is looking like, and then we guys can define something for the flex direction. So I'm going to copy this code and place it over here. Okay, and then we can have something for the background. So let's make use of this code fc. For setting the font family and font size, we can again copy these two lines of code and place it over here. Okay, so we are done with defining the required code for the Navbar ID, and now I am going to customize this unordered list. Okay, the one which you are able to see on this main web page over here on this left side. So for accessing this whole this unordered list and all the items which we have defined inside this unordered list, we can again make use of this ID. Fine, let's do that. So we can copy this whole thing and place it over here. Now because we want to access the unordered list as well as the list items, so that is the reason we can write down UL and LI like this. Now I don't want to see these bullets which are getting reflected right now against these hyperlinks. So what we can do, we can make use of list style type, and let's pass this value none. So now all the bullets will go disappear, and now we can define some padding also for this unordered list. Let's define a border. So I'm going to define a border of 1 pixel, and it should be a solid border, right? That's what is visible to us over here also. So it should be a solid border of, let's say, gray color. Fine, so I'm done with defining the required code for this navigation bars, unordered list and list items. Let's now come down and define the required code for this header thing, for customizing the view of this this text which is getting reflected over here. So how can we access this text? What we can do, we can again make use of this ID, and let's put this header and h1 like this. Now the first thing that I would like to do is, let's first align the text. So we can make use of text align property, and let's make use of this value center for this text align. Now I would like to see a gap in between, gap of 28 pixels in between the left margin and the content. So now I think I will be able to get the required output. See, so the space in between the left margin and the CSS document has now increased. Let's shrink the window and define the code for customizing the appearance of the anchor tags we have inside this Navbar Id. So how can we access the anchor tags? We can copy this whole ID and place it over here, and let's make use of this A for accessing everything whatever we have defined using this anchor tag. Okay, so I would like to have a text decoration of none. So it is going to remove that underlined thing which was getting reflected below the text. Okay, let's now refresh this code. Now we are not able to see this left side table. Why is it so? I think we have missed some code, so that is the reason it is not visible to us. Let's check it right from the beginning. So the first thing that we have defined is the CSS code for this main document. Okay, so this is perfectly fine. Display is flexible, width is 100%, and font family is Arial and sans serif. Okay, and this font size is 16 pixel. So everything is perfect over here. Let's come down, and then it is main body. So display is flexible. Direction is yes, we would like to have a column direction for this main body, and then we have a width of 75%. Padding is again 20 pixels. Okay, so everything is fine over here too. Then we have this nav bar. If I'll cut this thing from here, so now this table is getting reflected over here. Let's paste it again over here. Now I think we are missing something in this part. That is the reason we are not able to get the required output. Let's check it out. So padding is 20 pixels, it is perfectly fine. Width is 20 pixels. Okay, so let's make it 20%. It should not be 20 pixel, it should be 20%. Yes, so that was the mistake we guys were making. Right. Now if you will run this web page on a bigger window, you will be able to get the desired output. So this is what you are going to get finally as an output. Now if you'll click on any of these hyperlinks, so it is going to redirect you on that particular article. If you want to read something about CSS responsive, so you just have to hit the CSS responsive and you're going to get redirected on this beautiful CSS responsive article. Fine, so that's how you can design a beautiful technical document using the basic HTML and CSS coding. Hope you guys enjoyed this lecture a lot. Do like and share this video in your group so that it can reach to the maximum students possible. And thank you very much for joining me in this